President Trump just signed a new executive order, and it could be the biggest news for gamers you haven't heard yet. Games are being censored, not by Steam though, but by the banks that handle the money. This new executive order is the first legal step in stopping this. Recently, if you haven't heard, some games were removed from the Steam store, but this wasn't because of a bug or a developer's choice. Instead, it happened because a big payment company like Mastercard decided that a few games were a reputational risk. This is a vague rule that lets them pressure a company like Steam to remove any games they don't like. As a result, the banks that handle the money for Steam got involved, creating a chain of pressure that led to the games actually being removed. This is a big deal because it shows that a third-party company that handles the money, not the government or Steam itself, is now deciding what we can and can't buy. This kind of power is a form of digital censorship, and is especially concerning since a new rule was recently added to Steam's guidelines that gives them the power to remove content that may violate the rules and standards set forth by our payment processors. The thing is, the Steam situation is just one example of a much bigger problem. It's part of a growing trend of these payment companies censoring or even debanking anything they don't like. Debanking is when banks or payment companies close accounts or refuse to work with people and businesses for reasons that aren't actually about money. The censorship we're seeing on platforms like Steam is very similar to how banks debank people. The payment processors are essentially saying, if you don't remove this content, we will stop doing business with you, which means you can't get paid. This is a direct financial threat. It's what itch.io stated when they said they had to act urgently to protect the platform's core payment infrastructure. And also when Valve said if they didn't remove the games, it would prevent customers from buying games and content across Steam. The White House announcement calls this politicized or unlawful debanking, and highlights how some financial institutions have restricted access to services on the basis of political or religious beliefs or lawful business activities. So this isn't just about video games. Something similar has happened to cryptocurrency companies, legal gun stores, and even anime stores. The White House announcement points to other examples as well, such as when federal regulators suggested banks flag individuals who made transactions related to companies like Cabela's and Bass Pro Shop. These payment networks are essentially the roads of the digital economy. By controlling these roads, these companies can stop anyone they disagree with from doing business, even if they haven't broken any real laws. So to fight back against this, President Trump has signed a new executive order called Guaranteeing Fair Banking for All Americans. This is a direct response to what the president's office calls systemic abuses by financial institutions that undermine free expression and economic opportunity. This new rule tells federal groups that watch over banks to stop using vague reasons like reputational risk in their guidance and manuals. The order is specific, stating that regulators must remove the use of reputational risk or equivalent concepts that could result in politicized or unlawful debanking. From now on, banks must make their decisions based on clear financial reasons. The order also directs federal banking regulators to review banks for any past or current policies that encourage politicized or unlawful debanking and to take action, including charging a fine. The ultimate goal of this order, as stated by the White House, is to ensure that no American should be denied access to financial services because of their beliefs, affiliations, or political views. This is meant to prevent any financial unfair treatment and give fair access to banking for all legal businesses and people. So how does this new order connect directly to our problem on Steam? This is where the details of how payments work become really important. As Valve confirmed in their response, Mastercard didn't go directly to Valve and tell them to remove the games. Mastercard communicated with acquiring banks. These are the banks that handle the money for businesses like Steam. Mastercard cited one of its rules, Rule 5.12.7, which says that a business can't process transactions that may damage the goodwill of the corporation or reflect negatively on the marks. It's important to know that Visa has a very similar rule, just showing how this is a widespread issue across the payment industry. This is a perfect example of a vague reputational risk clause. Mastercard didn't have to prove the games were illegal, just that they were a risk to their brand. This was in response to a small number of complaints from the activist group Collective Shout. The acquiring banks, fearing that they would lose their partnership with a major payment network, then pressured Valve to remove the games. Valve complied, which is why they weren't fully debanked. So the executive order aims to stop this by forcing financial institutions to justify their decisions based on individual, objective, and risk-based analysis. The key difference is simple. Risk-based analysis is about measurable financial threats. Reputational risk is about feelings and public opinion. The new executive order is designed to stop financial companies from using the second one as an excuse to shut down legal businesses. This could protect game developers from being unfairly censored. So what can we expect now? While this executive order is a major step, it has its limitations. Some might argue that it doesn't mean much because it can't directly regulate companies like Mastercard or Visa. However, the executive order does create a powerful incentive for banks to stop caving to this type of pressure. If an acquiring bank knows that it could be fined by a federal regulator for acting on a reputational risk concern, it's far less likely to do so. This could make the vague rules of payment processors effectively powerless. According to Valve's newest statement, they were pressured by these banks, citing Mastercard's rule. So while Valve wasn't formally debanked, they were put in a position where they had to choose between censorship and a massive financial threat. This is the exact thing this executive order is trying to stop. Looking forward though, this executive order could pave the way for more changes. We could see new legislation like the Fair Access to Banking Act gain momentum in Congress. This act, which has seen bipartisan support, aims to prevent banks from using subjective, non-financial standards when deciding who to do business with. A new law would have way more power than an executive order. It could directly and legally stop payment networks from denying service based on a business's legal activities or political views. The details of the bill are designed to force this change. For example, it would prevent banks from making decisions based on unfair and random standards, a legal way of saying a decision made without a good, clear reason. The bill requires banks to have a written, documented report showing a risk-based analysis for all decisions. This means they would have to back up their choices with clear, factual information, not vague concerns about their brand. This would be a more permanent solution, like treating these payment companies as essential services. So if the pressure from payment processors start to disappear, the new rule on Steam would become unnecessary and could pave the way for a return to a more hands-off content policy on the platform. So although the fight to stop censoring games is not over yet, there are some signs it might not last forever.